Today, exactly 160 years ago, the first ironclad warship engaged in battle.
That's right. We're here at the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia, the home of the USS Monitor. On March 8, 1862, the CSS Virginia steamed out into this river to engage the Union fleet. On this day, the world would finally see what one single ironclad could do against a squadron of wooden ships.
And guess what, Tom? As it turned out, the CSS Virginia would prove one ironclad is all you need. Tom, before we get to the naval battle, I think that we should mention the CSS Virginia, which at the time was much more commonly called the Merrimack, was not the world's first ironclad.
That's right. She was the first ironclad in battle, but not the first one constructed. The world's first ironclad set sail 2 years prior in France.
The British and French both built ironclad warships before the American Civil War, and as you can see, they looked very much like traditional frigates, but with iron-plated hulls. The Rebel ironclad that saw action today looked, a little different. You might even say she was ugly. Unlike her European predecessors, this Confederate ironclad was a casement ship, designed with a lower profile and sloping armor. She was quite unlike anything the world had seen before, and on March 8, 1862, the fledgling Confederate Navy was very eager to see what their new wonder weapon could achieve in battle.
The results were spectacular.
Well, spectacular if you were a Southerner, I guess.
When the Rebel ironclad steamed into battle, she was not alone. She was accompanied by 2 tugboats and 3 small wooden gunships. The Federal squadron in the area included 5 warships and a number of smaller support craft. The USS Cumberland and Congress opened fire, but their shots deflected off the armor plate. In the ensuing battle, the Cumberland was sunk when she was rammed below the waterline. The Congress was set on fire by hot shot from the Virginia as well. The other Federal ships fled the scene.
It's hard for us today to imagine the chaotic scene that unfolded in this river. So let's hear from an eyewitness account written by a young lieutenant manning a gun crew on the USS Cumberland. This may help you visualize what it was like that day if you were the one fighting an ironclad for the first time.
Seeing that our shot made so little impression, the gun captains were ordered to fire only at the ports. The captain of the number 1 gun, a splendid seaman named Kirker, had both arms taken off at the shoulder as he was holding his handspike and guiding the gun. He passed me as he was carried below, but not a groan escaped from him. The dead were thrown over the other side of the deck, the wounded carried below. No one flinched, but went on loading and firing. The carnage was something awful.
That letter was written by Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, who escaped the sinking Cumberland. He went on to survive many other naval battles in the war.
Yes, his post-war story is pretty incredible too, if you check that out. The ship that he went down on, the Cumberland, she went down with colors flying and is still on the floor of Hampton Roads as a wreck today. And the Cumberland wasn't the only casualty on March 8th. The Virginia sustained some minor damage and 2 men killed, but one of the wounded was her captain, Franklin Buchanan. He was actually shot in the leg by a Union sharpshooter with a rifle. Buchanan is an interesting fellow for a number of reasons. Before the Civil War, he was a founder of the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis and its first superintendent. And at the outbreak of the war, he was the commandant of the Washington Navy Yard. He was a very experienced and respected naval officer in the American Civil War and would go on to become the only admiral promoted in the Confederate Navy.
That's right. Buchanan's wound took him out of action for a while, but the biggest wound that day was to the U.S. Navy's pride. The events that took place today, 160 years ago in these waters, stunned newspaper readers around the world, including President Lincoln and his cabinet members. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton feared the rebel monster might sail up and attack Washington, D.C.
It caused quite the panic, but there was one man who remained calm in Washington tonight, Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles. Welles understood 2 important facts that got lost in the reporting on the disaster of March 8th. First, he knew the CSS Virginia was barely seaworthy and could never make it anywhere close to Washington. And second, he knew that his own ironclad, the USS Monitor, was due to arrive at Hampton Roads any moment.
Any moment, you say?
Yes, in fact, the Monitor arrives this evening at dusk, just as the battle is ending. So that sets the stage for a big rematch tomorrow.
Greg, something else happened tonight on March 8th. Something just as important as the first engagement of the Merrimack. This evening, President Abraham Lincoln called 12 top generals into the White House, excluding McClellan, and informed them in a dramatic face-to-face meeting that he was approving McClellan's Urbana plan. When polled, 8 of the 12 generals voiced support for McClellan's master strategy of an amphibious assault to swing around behind the rebel defenses at Manassas and cut them off from Richmond.
The so-called Urbana plan was not President Lincoln's first choice. He had begged McClellan for a direct assault on the rebel positions, but tonight, March 8th, the president finally relented. Exasperated and desperate for any offensive movement, Lincoln privately wrote, "Napoleon himself could not stand still any longer with such an army."
And so the stage is set for the young Napoleon to begin his great campaign on the peninsula.
Indeed it is. And over the course of the next 10 weeks, here on Little Wars TV, you can join us as we follow that campaign in real time. We'll be back here tomorrow on March 9th to see the world's first ironclad battle at the Mariner Museum and talk about this seminal event in military history. We'll refight the action on the tabletop. Make sure you're subscribed to Little Wars TV to never miss a campaign update.
James River is a hard road to travel. The gunboats give it up in terror and despair. For Richmond is a hard road to travel, I declare.